Good morning, Armor Down. How was your weekend? How did you sleep? I'm kind of excited for this week's training because this is fourth bell, and this is what Armor Down is for. Um, and kind of I'll explain that in a minute, but let's kind of recap where we've come. So we talked about what the brain kind of does. So it's not this passive thing that sits inside your skull and waits for stimulus. It is actively participating in the kind of construction of the world around you, how you perceive it, what you actually see as opposed to what you don't see. Um, it is not only predicting what's about to happen, but there are essentially protocols. So a trigger happens, and then boom, 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 boom. All these things happen in succession. So your brain is very, very active, and it's very, very active from its past into your future, all predicated on embodiment and survival. So it's evolved over 13.5 billion years, probably longer, to do the things that it does to make you who you are and give you the ability to interact with the world around you. So we know now that it's a much more complex, much more involved processor than, kind of even as recently as a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, than we've ever understood. And part of what makes our understanding so much more full is that the way we're understanding the brain is also how we're teaching autonomous stuff, artificial intelligence. So it's not just the science that's validating this understanding of the brain, it's also the money, right? So follow the money. So from there, we go from the brain to, okay, well, what do you do about the fact that the brain is actually projecting? It's jumping out ahead. So you're kind of inside this process. Well, you shake it up. You change the process. Well, how do you change the process? You armor down. Why do you want to armor down? Well, if you're watching this, chances are you're somebody who embodies service, somebody who is willing to go to the edge of kind of their comfort zone and help others. Maybe your service was to the nation. Maybe it was to, serving others during the pandemic, whatever. Service is the foundation of kind of who we're targeting, right? So if you've got this and you've got this process going on that's built off the past and projects into the future, is there anything you can do about it? The answer is yes. So what you can do about it is you can disrupt and reclaim agency over the way this predictive processor, your brain, thinks and processes the world around you. How do you do that? You do that by bringing yourself into the present moment, taking all these things that are swirling past, future, blah, 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 all these predictions, all these protocols, and then collapsing them into the present moment, essentially turning down the processor way, way, way down into the present moment. And why do you want to do that? Well, for most of us, say most people in the West, and this argument is based off of the fact that we're only now beginning to work this kind of awareness into our culture. The reason why we want to do that is because it's within our ability to do so. And we can actually influence how the brain goes about what it does, as opposed to just let the brain being just triggered by culture or triggered by zeitgeist or whatever. You're participating. Okay. So the way we do that is first bell, which is taming the mind. Okay. Bell one tames the mind, brings the mind into the present moment. The emphasis on bell one is the senses. The emphasis on bell one is predictability, safety, the environment around you. It's also closely associated with situational awareness if you're military minded. So it's okay. I'm going to bring it all into the present moment: sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and interoception. So the feelings of what's going on in your body. We'll expand on that more, but that's bell one, present moment. All that stuff's happening in the present moment. Bell two is the body, right? Getting to the body. It is kind of the opposite of no pain, no gain. It's the opposite of pain is weakness leaving the body. It is the opposite of just suck it up and drive on. It is coming into the body, learning from the body, recognizing the subtleties of the sensational experiences of the body. And because the body is, it's a very full, the body is embodied, right? That's what gives you your experience. So we break it into chunks: ground, pelvis, core, heart space, throat, top of the head. So that's Bell 2. Bell 2 trains the mind. We talked about, if you were going to train a wild elephant, right? You would train the wild elephant first by taming it and then by training it. You can't train it before you tame it. So Bell 1 comes before Bell 2. Okay. Bell 3 is the breath. The breath experience. Bell 3, the breath experience, is the kind of training ground for being aware of your emotions and having the capacity to do something about it. So you've got these realms, these protocols: this parasympathetic protocol, which is rest, relax, digest; sympathetic protocol, which is fire it up, fight, flight, freeze. These protocols. And what these protocols do, as you kind of lean in more into one or the other, is they spin up all kinds of processes. So a protocol is boom, 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 boom. These processes all happen, right? So you can spin these protocols up. So you can spin up the parasympathetic protocol by taking deep, soothing breaths. You can spin up the sympathetic protocol by speeding your breath way up and getting tense, or you can even spin it up with your thoughts. These are the realms that you're operating with. So by going into third bell, you're getting into the breath experience, studying the breath, where it is, how intense it is, its direction, depth, and size, all these aspects of the breath, because this is also where your emotions show up. So your emotions show up in the same area as the breath experience. So when you go into third bell, what you're trying to do is you're trying to study and learn and participate with this incredible thing called the breath and the location of where you feel it. Interoception, right? Remember I said interoception, the awareness or the feeling of the body. By paying attention to your breath, you'll be able to start to notice when emotions show up. And trust me, there are layers upon layers upon layers of awareness, and there's layers and layers and layers of armor, right? So as you're going through the bells, as you're going through this process, you'll start to see where those layers are. And ultimately, where you're headed is fourth bell, when those layers start to be accessible and those layers of armor begin to be noticeable. And then you can start to really armor down, because what it means to armor down is to open your heart. When you start to open your heart, you start to see things in a different way. And when you start to see things in a different way, you have a chance to evolve old patterns. So old patterns that maybe came from your family, that maybe came from the military, that maybe came from your trauma, those old patterns don't have to hold sway anymore, but they will hold sway until you become aware of the armor. So here's an example. My armor shows up in tense moments. It shows up the most in tense moments, but I have layers of armor. And part of the layers of armor that I have come from the different traumas I've experienced, but they've also come from my family and the trauma that my family has experienced, and how they have passed on the experience of that trauma and how they've navigated to me through their actions. So, for example, my grandfather on my dad's side, really chill, just great guy, blah, blah, blah. But he was also a Marine. He got his lung blown out and island hopping in the Pacific during World War II. For him, there's a space that everything's chill, and all of a sudden it's not chill, and he just comes at you with the knife hand, like just a whoosh, just this quick boom. All of a sudden, the whole world just explodes with like, oh, and then you just got to do what he says, right? The first time that happened, I was 12, and I just remember just being like, what just happened? It was over the remote control, like something. He reached the threshold and he just erupted with his knife hand and just like, give it back now. Whoosh, command voice. And I was just, he passed that on to my dad. My dad's interpretation or expression of that was when my dad gets spun up, he becomes very, very sharp. So he evolved that kind of knife hand to have this kind of super sharp, like surgical blade. Like he would just kind of, so it would be like there'd be like an area where tension would grow, and he would just kind of just slice in, and he wouldn't slice in the same way my grandfather did. My grandfather's knife was just this massive, just whoosh, but my dad's was like whoosh, like this quick, just dish. And so now my kind of same expression of that has got this, like, it's just another variation of it. And I see it show up, and I saw it show up last night, for example. So we had reached a threshold in my family. There was a lot of tension going on. I won't go into details, but it all centered around the dog, and he's incontinent and all this other kind of stuff. So anyway, it showed up for me because Allegra, my 8-year-old, when things get really tense around her, she starts asking lots and lots of questions. And so as she was asking these questions, my tension showed up in me making demands of her. Like I was trying to hold it together, lots of craziness going on, holding it together. Allegra's asking all these questions about all this stuff. And instead of answering her questions, because I'm just I'm so wrapped up in all this stuff, I'm like, get off your iPad. Why are you still on your iPad? And she's like, what? Say what again? Say why again? So I'm trying to hold it together. It's all spinning up inside of me. And so I'm like attacking her for her iPad. And she's just like, what? And then she's like, why? And I'm like, say why again. I mean, this is all happening last night. So I'm spinning up. My heart is armoring up, right? I'm becoming just more and more just like, now I'm thinking I'm evolved because I'm not doing the same as my grandfather, which is just like, I'm not doing the same as my dad, but instead I'm like getting this whoosh, and I'm not coming at you. I'm coming at, why are you on this iPad, or why are you disobeying me? Like just this heartlessness, right? Just this. And so I'm kind of aware that this is happening, and I'm like, oh, I'm aware. So 5 minutes later, I walk up to Allegra and I said to her, because there's no yelling. It's not yelling, but they're these little jabs, right? Like my grandfather, it was just big, right? Threshold explosion. My dad, it was threshold, not an explosion, but like a grandfather, dad, me, So we're evolving this, right, over time. So I walk up to Allegra and I said to her, Allegra, when you feel tension, do you ask lots and lots of questions? Is asking questions what's helping you get the energy out? And she's like, I think so. And so later when I was putting her to bed, I was like, when I get really tense, when I pass my threshold and get on you about, your iPad or whatever, that's me kind of pushing that out there. And she said, well, what do we do about it? And I was like, well, what I am working on is becoming more open-hearted. And she's like, well, why? And I was like, when you reach a threshold, the energy that comes up inside of you has a couple options. It can either be expressed or it can be absorbed by an open heart. An open heart never runs out of space. It is impossible. That's the story of all of our ancient teachers. The open heart is an infinite space. It holds infinite anything. There's nothing an open heart can't absorb and turn into love. That's the power of an open heart. So I'm trying to tell this to Allegra, and I'm like, look, you have an open heart. Your heart is wide open. It's an open heart, and you know that just by how much love you show the dog. Like when the dog is incontinent all over the place, and I'm just like let the fucking dog die, and you're like, I love you, sweet baby. I'm so sorry. And you don't feel anything. You don't feel any anger towards the dog at all. All you feel is sweetness and patience and love. That's an open heart. And so I said to her, I was like, look, an open heart never runs out of space. It's like a room full of goodwill can never fill up, right? It's like the well of open-heartedness never goes dry. The love is infinite. And so what happens when you have a closed heart or an armored up heart is that it's got to come out somehow. So it's not going into the heart and the heart just absorbs it and neutralizes. It's alchemy. Heart, rage, anger comes into the heart just like, heart can give a shit. The heart is the most powerful thing. So all this stuff comes in, you got armor over your heart, and it's got nowhere to go. So it's got to come out somewhere. I mean, I talked about this in, the first time I caught it, the first time I caught anger before it. So when the buildup is happening inside, right? Noticing it, having ways to do it. Lots of times when that buildup is happening, I can exercise or meditate, but sometimes it happens quick. Like there was like I walked into the house yesterday and there was just I walked into chaos yesterday after literally just going to run an errand. I walked into chaos. And as I'm walking through chaos, I'm armoring up and my heart is becoming like protected, right? Got to protect the heart from all this kind of stuff. And that's my pattern, right? The idea is that I got to protect myself. Well, the problem with that is the more protected you are, the more kind of armored you are, the more this stuff that's inside of you, this energy inside of you has to kind of move, right? The only other option is to go into the heart. And when it goes into the heart, it becomes neutralized and there's just love and there's infinite patience. And, you pick a famous leader, pick a famous sage, pick any religious icon. And that's kind of what they figured out was the ultimate kind of story of this is Jesus and Buddha. They kind of go different directions after they get to the open heart. But the story of Jesus and Buddha is that you've got the capacity. Even alchemy. So you could even go Muhammad. You could go in any direction here. But anyway, the heart has the capacity to turn this stuff into something else. And so fourth bell is all about practicing that. And it's amazing what it does. It just really, and I'll tell you more about the dog on, next time, but that's the goal of Armor Down. The fourth bell is all about opening the heart. And the way what opening the heart does is it gives a place for all the tension, all the stuff of life to go and turn into love and turn into patience. So that's the goal, is to get to that space. And it's hard. It is really, it's not necessarily hard. It just takes a long time. The armor that we've got is based off of fundamental misunderstandings about what our brains do, how our identities operate. We just fundamentally did not kind of interact with this stuff until relatively recently in the West. In other parts of the world and other kind of eras, this interaction is much more understood. And if you look in some of the ancient East texts, this understanding is much more fleshed out and practiced and integrated into the culture. It's really not for us. It's becoming that way. But if you're military trained, open-heartedness is not on the menu of training at all. And what we're taught is to shut all that down, and for good reason. You don't want to go into battle loving the enemy so much that you wouldn't be willing to take them out. That's not okay. You could argue that we were more open-hearted, and that modern combat training that really evolved after World War I, really kind of got things going. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But anyway, fourth bell. Okay. Fourth bell is all about open-heartedness. So I'll get off my soapbox here. Yeah, I've been ranting for a while, so we won't do training today. So this is more informational, but it's worth it. I mean, you got to understand that the whole armor down, the whole goal of to armor down is to get to more open heartedness. And that's it. That's fourth bell. So we'll practice fourth bell Thursday. All right.